Max at the round table, before he got eliminated, as like people were voting for him, and then I said I'm going to join Sandra's opinion because I value her opinion from Survivor. And then on his way out, he stood up and pointed at me, and he went, "This kid would make the perfect traitor. He looks so innocent." I was just like, oh my gosh.
Wow. So you really had a moment that you were put on the spot.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying with the Ekin-Su thing in the first episode, if you remember, like, she just starts grilling me. It's like when you go through customs and you don't have anything, like you don't have drugs on you, but it's like they're questioning you about drugs, and then you're like, I swear I don't. But you're like just all nervous about it. And then when Sandra accused me, it was when I walked in with the shield and I go, I have the shield. She stood up and goes, Bergie's the traitor. He murdered himself, so nobody would ever think he was the traitor. So like that was one of her theories.
I want to gab.
All right, so today we're gabbing with Carsten Bergersen, aka Bergie, aka Bergielicious, from the second season of The Traitors. Bergie made quite the impact as a faithful during this season, but ultimately the Traitors got him. Bergie, I'm excited to chat with you about this season. How's it going?
Let's go. I'm excited to be here. I'm just excited to keep going with this whole reality TV gig as long as I can.
Yeah, I mean, I was just listening to an interview that you did. It must have been a couple of days ago. It was an exit interview that you did, and you kind of talked about how you got this call before you'd even left Fiji after filming Love Island, and you'd been a big fan of Big Brother and some of these shows. And did you feel like almost, again, because your show I guess your show had just aired, but like, did you feel almost like a fan amongst a lot of like kind of reality TV titans in some ways?
Oh my gosh. So I stepped out of the van, or like we just arrived at the castle. I just remember seeing like Peter from The Bachelor, and I had like, oh my gosh, I've seen you on TV before. And then it was like, there's Deontay Wilder, there's Dan Giesling, Janelle. It was just Sandra and Parvati. I was just like, oh my gosh, I am in over my head right now.
Do you think that gave you an advantage in some way? Do you think people underestimated you, or how do you think that positioned you sort of within the cast?
I think that gave me a great advantage for being a faithful.
Yeah.
Right after or a traitor. I could have made like the best traitor ever because nobody would ever expect it. Everybody's like, gotta be a Survivor player. It's gotta be a Big Brother player making all these big moves. I think right from the get-go, I was like completely underestimated, under the radar. I felt like everyone thought they could easily like get me to switch. I could be a swing vote for them.
Right.
Like they could convince me to do anything they wanted in that game.
And is there I mean, it's been so fun watching this season just in general, and with the social media aspect of it all. For you, is there anything that you have learned about for the first time while watching? Like, was there a conversation that you weren't privy to, or is there a scene that sticks out to you that you were like, oh, I didn't realize that these two people had that moment, or something like that?
Well, definitely all the traitor turrets and like any interaction with the traitors is just like, whoa, like the whole poison scene with Parvati, like walking around with the chalice. I was like, how did I miss this? It was right in front of me.
And that was like, well edited. That was well edited TV too. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was so much fun to see that, because I was like, the whole time, like, I never knew about the poison. It was like right in front of people's faces. Like, I was still thinking they went to the turret that night and like wrote on a letter who they wanted to poison for the day. So I didn't think they actually like literally poisoned someone. So I'm like, did they actually? So like watching episode 3 for the first time, like, oh my gosh, it was an actual object. So that was probably the coolest thing I got to see from a viewer standpoint. And then trying to think of a conversation.
Like, what did you make of Peter and Parvati's conversation in this past episode, where they I guess it was past episode. Yeah.
Well, and like Rochelle was planning that already. Like, if you remember episode 6, we talked about potentially doing that. So I wasn't completely shocked when I saw it, because I was like, I think we were still debating which plan should we go with. Should we go with Peter's plan? And part of Peter's plan was to vote out Parvati. Then Kevin and I go to Phaedra and say, Peter's acting weird. We think he got recruited. That way Phaedra wouldn't murder us that night, because then she would think we would vote with her to vote out Peter. So that was plan A. Plan B was to use Trichelle's plan, use Parvati to vote out Phaedra. So like they lost the vote when I got eliminated. So I think it made perfect sense when they went to Trichelle's plan.
Totally. And to me, for Bergie, you were kind of like the quintessential faithful, and like you played as a faithful so well. Did anybody ever accuse you of being a traitor? I feel like we haven't seen that.
Yeah, Max did and Sandra.
So
Both of them
when like kind of like midway through, or
so Max at the round table, before he got eliminated, as like people were voting for him, and then I said I'm going to join Sandra's opinion because I value her opinion from Survivor. And then on his way out, he stood up and pointed at me, and he went, "This kid would make the perfect traitor. He looks so innocent." I'm just like, oh my gosh!
Wow. So you really had a moment that you were put on the spot.
Yeah, well, I'm saying with the Ekin-Su thing in the first episode, if you remember, like, she just starts grilling me. It's like when you go through customs and you don't have anything, like you don't have drugs on you, but it's like they're questioning you about drugs, and then you're like, I swear I don't. But you're like just all nervous about it. And then when Sandra accused me, it was when I walked in with the shield and I go, I have the shield. She stood up and goes, Bergie's the traitor. He murdered himself, so nobody would ever think he was the traitor. So like she that was one of her theories. But
that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think MJ called me a traitor when the funeral episode or something like that.
Got it.
She just was like, Bergie could make a perfect traitor. I think she was just referring back to Max because he got banished the night before.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I watched the post-mortem that they put on Peacock, and Phaedra said basically that like she loved you and she adored you, but Parvati really wanted to murder you that night. And the only reason why she didn't protest that was because you were part of this clique, and she doesn't like cliques. Do you feel like being part of this faithful five or Peter's pals, whatever you want to call it, do you think that kind of bit you in the end and kind of was your death knell?
See, but at the same time, our clique knew we were gonna get murdered like every single night because we knew we were on to the traitors. So it was like one of us is hopefully gonna make it to the end, but we are gonna have a fire under our ass. We're not all gonna make it. So like that was part of our plan, like strategizing too. We're like, we're not all gonna make it. Like,
right.
If we ever seen like, we just kind of just knew it. We're like, we're not all gonna make it, but we're.
And you were okay with that?
I was okay with it because it's just because like there's two ways you can play the game. There's like Sandra's strategy: stay under the radar as long as possible, and then just hope to God you don't get murdered. But my thing was, I wanted to prove that like I could play this game was kind of my thing. And that's what bit me in the end. Cause like I could have easily just, not clicked with anybody, stayed under the radar.
Right.
But it would have destroyed me if I just got murdered randomly, like Tamara did, for example.
Sure.
Like if I died this next episode and I haven't accomplished anything, I would have been more hurt that I didn't actually try to play the game instead of stay under the radar.
No, I totally get that. But I guess one like a follow-up question to that would be like, I felt a shift as a viewer after you guys had gotten Dan out. You had successfully gotten banished a traitor, and I felt like that in that next episode there was sort of like a confidence or a cockiness that was coming from, I think, Peter more, but like just from the group in general, because you guys had gotten a traitor, and I think that anybody would have felt that way. Did you consider like distancing yourself at all at any point just to kind of like differentiate yourself from that group at all?
Yeah, so like immediately after that too, I went to MJ and Sandra to have like a one-on-one conversation to try to alleviate any pain that just happened with them. I was trying to keep good solid grounds with everybody, but it's tough when you're in that clique because it's like you don't want any information getting leaked because then people know your strategy. Because if MJ did hear we were considering Phaedra a traitor, I'm guaranteeing you she's gonna go tell Phaedra immediately what the strategy is.
Next question.
Yeah. And then we had to kick Phaedra out because we were suspecting her of being a traitor. It's like, you can't tell the traitor your strategy of like, hey, we're going to try to put you out tonight.
Totally.
Yeah.
When did was Dan, and when he sort of called out Phaedra right before he got banished, was that when Phaedra really became on your radar, or was she on your radar before that moment?
She was in my top 7 or 6 before Dan called her out. So like, that's really low. And it was because, if you remember, everybody was attacking Larsa because they thought it had to be a housewife. And then mysteriously that night, another housewife died. It was like, did a housewife just kill another housewife to get us off the scent? Yeah. That wasn't my idea. That was John and Peter's. So John and Peter came up with that theory. So I was like, I got to keep one on my like very low radar. So I think it was like 7 was Phaedra, 8 was Sheree for like list of suspects.
And then after Dan had called her out. Did you agree with Trishelle that like kind of he had to have named a traitor before he was leaving?
Yeah, I almost actually voted for Phaedra just to, but then I was like, that's a bad game. I'm gonna get murdered again, like immediately tonight if I do that. So I was like, don't do that. And the other thing was, I thought Phaedra could be my traitor angel, so I didn't want to vote out Phaedra, if that makes sense. I'm like, if I can get to the end with Phaedra and she just protects me from murder, I want her in this game.
Because you were her Bergielicious.
I was
you
a
had that in
Bergielicious,
with her.
yeah. And I was like, even if she is a traitor, I don't want to vote her out. So that was my thing. I don't know if I would have voted her out this past episode. I keep going back and forth. I'm like, I do I go with my group or would I just go with Parvati because I know she's a traitor? Like that would have been a conflicting episode. I think it would have been awesome to see me like having that whole confliction. Like, do I join Peter? Yeah, that was a whole confliction. And I think some of that with the sacrifice ceremony kind of screwed me over because if we were to banish Parvati, then I would have been completely safe from murder that night.
Yeah, 100%. Do you view that fire ceremony, that's kind of safety ceremony that kind of came out of nowhere? Did that also sort of bite you in terms of like, because the heat was on Peter and I kind of shifted everything with that ceremony. How do you think about that now in hindsight?
Yeah, see, and like if you remember watching it too, I never like tried to defend myself. It was because the people that had the torch in that moment, and I did want Peter to be safe. He was kind of leading the group. So it started with Sandra and Kevin. They picked Sheree right off the bat, and I was like, "There's no way Sandra's gonna let Kevin even try to like fight over." So I was just like, so they picked Sheree, and then I'm like, Sheree's probably gonna pick Phaedra because and she did, which is awesome, fine. And then I'm like, okay, there's the chance it's Phaedra. She picked CT. I was like, okay, CT's probably gonna pick Trishelle, and then maybe I'll say something, but then there's only one vote left, and then CT ended up picking John. So it was just like, save Peter.
You never really had a chance in that ceremony, right?
Yeah, just the way it went. Because I think if like let's say Sandra and Kevin got to pick 5 people, I would be upset if they didn't pick me in those top 5. But since just the way it went, everyone had their number 1. And I was probably on their top 3 or 4 to save, but it's the way it went. Everybody had a different number 1.
Yeah, totally. Circling back to you and Phaedra, I feel like again, she had this like admiration for you, but I feel like we never really saw that many moments between you two of like being close. Were you guys close and we just didn't see it? Because I saw in an interview you said that you actually sat next to her on the plane over, and that's how she started calling you Bergielicious. Can you like explain that?
Yeah, so it was funny. So I landed in Amsterdam. I went to my next flight to get to Scotland, and I ended up sitting next to Phaedra, and I helped her put her suitcase up. And she's like, "Where are you going, honey?" And you sign all these NDAs. You're not supposed to talk about where you're going. I'm like, "I'm just going to Scotland, taking a nice vacation." And she goes, "Are you going to a castle?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to a castle."
I love it.
Right then she starts questioning me like where I'm from, what I'm doing. And I was just like, and then she shares what she's from. She's like Housewives of Atlanta, married to medicine, shows me her kids. So we're talking. I'm like, I'm Bergielicious from my Instagram. So then I get the nickname Bergielicious. But there was a lot of times where we were just having conversations and in the castle that, obviously you can't show, it's not part of the storyline. It's not relevant to the Traitors.
Yeah,
it's like just us talking about family, how we live, even car rides to the mission, back, breakfast. And then someone would come in and go like, maybe Bergie's a traitor. And then she was go, no, not Bergie.
So she was your traitor angel. Yeah, she was your traitor angel.
Traitor angel and faithful angel, like both ways. She wouldn't banish me, and I don't think she wanted to murder me.
I love that. What was it like watching her? I mean, one of the moments that has gone viral is when she just sort of read Dan for filth at that round table. What was it like sitting there for that with the front row seat?
It was spectacular. It was like, oh my gosh. It was just, he was getting ripped. And then Kate with the, not my Bergielicious was problematic for you. I was just like, oh my gosh.
I think you should make merch I think you should make merch with that line on it. Yeah. I think that people would buy that.
Not my Bergielicious.
Yes, absolutely. Not my Bergielicious was problematic for you. Done. Selling out that t-shirt. I love that.
I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel. I was like, what should I call it? I'm thinking like Bergielicious updates, like weekly
100%. No, it's sticking. It's sticking. Absolutely. I also saw in an interview, Bergie, that you said that you sort of started to be onto Parvati a little bit after the funeral moment, and you were like, one of these people has to be a traitor, because you were thinking more like a producer. And that's been sort of one of my biggest questions about watching this show, is like, why aren't, and it's probably like a fourth wall thing, but why aren't we seeing more people think like producers? Because in my mind, it's like, obviously Parvati or Sandra would have been a traitor, or obviously Janelle or Dan would have been a traitor, and obviously a housewife is probably a traitor, just because that's the kind of TV that the Traitors gives us. Were we just not seeing that, or just because, again, it's the sort of fourth wall thing?
Yeah, it's the fourth wall thing, because immediately, like, Janelle was giving me tips. So this is how I kind of assumed Janelle was a faithful too, because she was giving me all these tips. She's like, you need to be looking where the cameras are pointing. If they're pointing at someone, they have to be filming a traitor, just in case they slip up. So it's like, you go into a room and you're like, where is this camera angled at? Like,
wow, that's crazy. I didn't think about that.
Well, yeah, because like if you slip up and like then you mention at the round table, everybody's like, where did you get this information? But like I never really could pick up on camera angles because there were so many cameras in every room. So that one didn't really help me at all. But the Parvati stepping into the coffin, I was thinking I'm a reality TV fan too. So I'm just thinking like, what, like, if I was watching at home right now, I know there's a traitor in there trying to put on their best performance, that they're not a traitor right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's got to be a survivor person. And it's
probably Parvati. Yeah, exactly. And
I honestly thought, so then I'm going back and like Larsa said she heard the sleeve. I'm like, oh my gosh, she was like one of the first selected, even though I was incorrect about that. But that's one of the reasons she got recruited. So it was just like, it all made sense from that angle.
Absolutely. And then I don't know if you saw this, but Sandra posted this long paragraph about her pool table moment, where she used the pool balls as sort of a strategy session with a bunch of the Bravo people. And in that paragraph, she said, like, it was just as important to get out some faithfuls as it was to get out traitors. How would you interpret her saying that? Like, because it doesn't seem like you were ever thinking in that way, maybe, or at least that we saw, because you guys were so focused on traitors.
Yeah. So another funny thing too. So like we get done with our strategy and then I walked into that and they kicked me out. They didn't show that either though. I walked in on that. They're like, no, you kick us out, you get to be kicked out. So I got the same treatment after.
There we go.
So they didn't show that, but I thought that would have been funny too. But yeah. So I was thinking more of a game aspect, and I never thought, of a show, like every show has like a final four. I was thinking like, oh, we can get all these traitors out in the next like 2 or 3 days or 4 days, and I wasn't thinking like of recruitments. I wasn't, because I only saw Traitor season 1. I didn't watch the international versions. Like I thought the recruitment was a twist, not because they lost the traitor. I thought it was just a cool little twist they did last year. So I wasn't thinking like that into the show that much. I was thinking more from a game aspect.
Yeah.
And the show's going to make sure it lasts.
Totally. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges of being on this show, is like, is it a show or is it a game, or is it a game and then a show? It's sort of, that's probably kind of a mind fuck,
Yeah. And I think that was part of my downfall, because, we were working so hard to get the traitors out, and then we had the sacrifice ceremony because I think we were doing a little too good. They're like, well, we got to make sure we stretch this out. So That's my assumption. I don't know maybe that was planned, but that's
how you interpret it. Right.
Yeah.
You said in your post-mortem that your strategy was to make everybody feel like you trusted them, but you actually, by the end, only really trusted 3 people. Who are those 3 people, and why did you really trust them wholeheartedly?
Trishelle, Peter, and John. Yeah. I just, right from the get-go, like Trishelle, I always say, like, for the same reasons you figure out someone's a traitor, you can do the same things to figure out someone's a faithful. And I made the argument before, like, if you're going to call someone out really early on in the game, it kind of proves you're a faithful, because now everybody's drawn to you all of a sudden. Like, Trishelle calling out Peppermint is a very dangerous move, because you watch Traitor season 1 of the US. If you called someone out and then were incorrect, everybody was like voting that person out the next day. It's like, oh, since you were so adamant, then you must be the traitor, even though that's very incorrectly thinking, right?
Right.
So, and Trishelle was so adamant, like she's crying when Peppermint got banished. Like I was like, either she's a fantastic traitor or she's just a really, she's
empathetic person, right?
She screwed up and she's mad about it and upset about it. So I was like, I took it as she's upset about that she screwed up. And then John, they never showed this, but he gave a speech of like on my wife and kids, and he did a toast that he's a faithful, and he's like crying during the speech. He's like, I came here as a politician, like as my past as a politician. Politicians do dirty things, and I just want to prove in this game that I'm like a faithful and I can be a good person. And I was
that's
like,
so sweet.
Faithful.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
He's doing this crying, and then there's other people in the room, and then they toast to like also being a faithful. I'm like, okay, that screwed everything up there, but like John, I think you're a faithful still.
Right.
And then Peter, him and I were just strategizing from day one. And like we both worked getting Dan and Parvati were like our top two suspects. I'm like, if you're a traitor right now, you're not going to throw two traitors underneath the bus right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that whole ploy with the shield thing that was sort of the turning point, I feel like, for both of them to be found out. Right. So like, because that worked, it's like, all right, we did it kind of thing.
We did it. Yeah. Because even if it didn't work, Parvati and Dan were still going to be my top two. You know,
in terms of picks for being traitors.
For picks for being traitors. Even if it didn't work out, they were still like Parvati in the coffin, you know, that still wasn't going to go anywhere.
Right. If you were Peter, would you have accepted the invitation to be a traitor?
That's tough because I would have sat there for a while. And I think if the sacrifice ceremony happened before, so if it happened the same time Peter got it, I don't think so. Because I was like, oh, we're so far into this game. And like, I think we got the traitors pretty lined up right now. And we have a pretty solid group to get them out. So I think I like almost have a better chance as winning as a faithful at that point. But if I got it after the sacrifice ceremony, like during this ultimatum with Kate, like I would definitely be taking it.
Got it. Yeah.
So it was a timing thing.
Yeah, for sure. And then, you know, there have been a lot of conversation, I feel like, just about like, you know, how fair it is for the faithfuls versus how fair it is for the traitors, just sort of in the setup of this game and the show. If you were to make one change to the show to either make it more even or just to, I don't know, heighten the stakes a little bit, what would you change about the traitors?
So the one thing I would change, keep the shields in, keep all that stuff in. Because like the shields aren't that much of an advantage, only when the traitors don't know who has it. And, you know, then it just deflects a murder onto someone else. The thing I would change, more traitors in the beginning, no recruitment. So maybe 5 to 6 traitors right in the beginning. Some of them are going to be found out pretty early on because there's a lot of them now. There's a lot of them now, but like no more recruitments. And that way, and also if the season ends early, it ends a little early. If it ends an episode early or an episode too early, I feel like that's a better balance than like, because then as a faithful, you're just getting punished every time you get a traitor out. It's like there's no point in getting traitors out.
Right.
You know, it's like,
and in your scenario, do the faithfuls know how many traitors there are?
No, honestly, so we banished one, right? So we were told they got to recruit first night, and I thought they selected 3, they recruited 1, so there was 4. We banished Dan, there was 3, and then they tried to recruit Peter, and they failed, so there were still 3.
So you guys were doing better than you even realized, basically, the whole time.
Yeah, we were doing way better, but we were trying to figure out. Okay, so it's like we all had arguments on. So top 2, Dan, Parvati, and then the next 2 were always like, you know, crazy. It was just nobody knew. Everybody had a different answer for their next 2.
Yeah,
but like Phaedra was in everybody's like top 5, top 7, top 8, and then once Dan called her out, she was in the top 4 for everybody. So it's like, okay, she's the next target, and then you know who's after that, who knows.
Yeah. Well, you guys have a reunion coming up, and so this is the last question I'm going to ask. What do you want? Is there anything that you want to address at the reunion taping? Is there something that's top of mind for you that you want answered, even if it doesn't pertain to you?
I'm interested to see the Phaedra and Dan dynamic for sure. From
Dirty Dan, yep.
Dirty Dan throwing her under the bus. Because that, you know, yeah, he didn't throw Parvati's. I won't say he threw Parvati's game under the bus. I don't think he did. Like Parvati also still let him murder me. Like she should have been fighting way harder if she really didn't want him to do that. But the other thing too, I just like asked to be on another show.
Yes,
that won't be addressed to the cast, but I'll just be like, hey, producer, is anybody want?
No, I mean, Bergie, I feel like you were introduced to so many people via this second season of The Traitors, and so many people fell in love with you. So I think a lot of people would love to see more of you on reality TV. There are so many mashup shows, so I'm sure it will happen. Yeah, it'll be great. Well, Bergie, this is all the time we have, but thanks for taking the time. I loved picking your brain about this show. Amazing season to be a part of, and congrats. It's been fun to watch.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm enjoying everything, like the interviews and whatever else I got to do today.
That makes me happy. All right, thanks, Bergie.
Yeah, have a great day.
I want to gab.